That. That's better. Should I start over? I almost hesitated to come here after talking to Kent Shirley about you guys a little while. You ever had somebody talk to you about a movie that you, for some reason, you hadn't got to see, and it won all kinds of Academy Awards, and everybody says, "Oh, this is the greatest movie you ever saw," and then you go see it and say, "I didn't care for that." I remember when my wife and I were overseas, and Forrest Gump became real popular, and everybody was talking about Forrest Gump, and it was a year or so after it had been on the theaters and on DVDs, or we didn't have DVDs then, but it had been on a good while, and we came home from furlough, and somebody showed it to us. Oh, that's all right, but it wasn't that great. You know, life is like a box of chocolates. Run, Forrest, run. That was the only good part of it, I guess. I was a Vietnam veteran, so I had a little interest in some of that aspect of things. But sometimes you're disappointed when people talk about something too much, so I was afraid that maybe I was going to be disappointed, but I've been real pleased so far with your music and your fellowship and the joy that you seem to have in the Lord, and I enjoyed the time this morning in Morning Manna, I believe you call it. That's a good name for Sunday school. I like that better than Sunday school. Have to talk to Pastor Kenny about changing that. I'm on the staff of Bookcliff Church, Bookcliff Baptist Church in Grand Junction. I'm responsible for the grade school, middle school, preschool there. My wife and I were missionaries in West Africa for 31 years, almost 32 years in Ghana and Nigeria. She got sick in 2003, and we went back, and she got sicker, and finally in 2006 we had to come home, and she has Parkinson's, and it's one of those things that's up and down and up and down, and this morning it was down. She had wanted to come and be here this morning, but she just couldn't. So I'm here by myself today to share with you. I'd like you to turn with me, if you have your Bibles, to the book of Acts, chapter 20, verse 32. I'm just going to read one verse. After being in your morning manna this morning, and I thought, he asked me, would you read Romans 6? I said, the whole thing? Yes, the whole thing. And that was just one of a series of passages that we read in our study this morning. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to read all of from chapter 19 to up here to chapter 20 to give you the story of Paul's ministry in Ephesus. But I think I've selected just one verse. It's the key verse. It's the verse that I want to talk about, though I'll talk a little bit about some of the background. And verse 32 of chapter 20. And now, remember, Paul is in Ephesus. He spent 3 years there, had a very wonderful, successful ministry. Thousands of people in Asia, that part of the world, had come to the Lord under his ministry and the ministry of others that he was training there. Some really marvelous things happened. I'll mention some of them in a moment. But now he's about to say farewell to them, or a final farewell. He's on his way to Jerusalem, and we all know how the story goes from there. And so this is his final farewell speech, or part of it, to the Ephesian elders that came down from Ephesus to meet him. He says, and now I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you the inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I think one of the most difficult things in life is saying goodbye to those that you love. I've said a lot of goodbyes in my life. My mother and father-in-law lived in Cedar Edge, and I can't tell you how many times we left for Africa and came back on furlough, came back for other things a couple of times, and every time we would leave, that saying goodbye was a painful thing. It was especially painful because my mother and father-in-law, if they're Christians, they're not really committed Christians, didn't understand why my wife and I were going to Africa. And beyond that, they didn't understand why we were taking our children with us. I guess they thought we should leave them home or something, but we went when they were just toddlers, first two. And every time we went, it was a painful goodbye. Sometimes you said goodbye to grandparents, and you knew you weren't going to see them again. 3 out of my 4 grandparents died while we were on the mission field. And I was close to all of them. Pastors often have to say goodbye. Missionaries have to say goodbye. When we left Ghana for the last time, I had such a wonderful ministry there, and my wife did, and I had made such friends with some of the Ghanaian students that I taught who later became pastors, who were my fellow workers on the field there, and so they were like brothers to me. We slept together in the same beds in some of these villages as we go out to do crusades and things, and we ate from the same bowl. If you know how Ghanaians eat, the men all eat from one big bowl, and you got to learn to eat fast. Soup with your hands, and or you don't get any. But shared so many experiences, wonderful experiences, seeing God at work. And when we left Ghana in 1994, it just broke my heart. And a couple of my dear African friends stood there and cried, and African men don't cry. You really got to push one of those guys to get them to cry, and they were crying as we left. Wailing would be more like what would describe. It was a painful leaving. A painful leaving. A couple of years ago when Pastor Kenny called me on the phone, he said, well, are you ready to leave Norwood? I was pastoring at Norwood after we'd come home and spend some time with the family, and then I went to pastor the church, Southern Baptist Church at Norwood, and it was a painful time when I left there. Pastor Kenny called and said, are you ready to leave Norwood? I said, not really. What do you want? And he said, well, he said, I desperately need somebody to administer the school here, and I know you've had a lot of experience. That's what I did in Africa. I was the principal of 2 theological colleges, and then went to the main seminary in Ogbomoso, Nigeria, where I directed the Doctor of Ministry program for the school. Started it, developed it, directed it for a while. And so he knew I'd had experience with schools, and so he said, I'd never been to grade school before, but he said, why don't you consider coming down? I said, I don't really want to, Kenny, but I'll pray about it. Well, a lot of things came together as we prayed about that, my wife and I, and so I came down and was interviewed for the position by the committee at the church, and Joan and I really felt this what the Lord was leading us to do, and didn't tell anybody at the church what was going on, you can imagine. And one Sunday morning I got up and read my resignation letter, and I had a good ministry there, loved those people, and I was kind of surprised because I was quite happy being there. Small church about the size of this one, and was enjoying ministering there a great deal. I loved being at that section of Colorado. Was beautiful, and it was fun being there. I liked the snow. After being in Africa for 30-some years, I liked the snow a whole lot. It was a little cool at times, but I liked it. I still like the rain. When it rains, I look forward to the clouds coming over and it clouding all up, and rain for weeks makes me happy because that was the cool time in Nigeria and Ghana, and I enjoyed that. I have a lady here from Cameroon who's been in Cameroon, parents in Cameroon. It's, yeah, you know what I'm talking about when you're talking about glad the rain comes. Well, I enjoyed that. But that farewell that day, when we had the farewell thing, it was a sad day because I loved those people, and a lot of them loved me. And you know, there's different reactions. I had one family that we were really close to. He was the treasurer up there, and I was really close to him once a month at least. And, he was a good guy, older man, and his wife, and they just loved us, and we spent a lot of time together. They were not happy about us leaving, and in fact, they got a little angry about it. Why are you abandoning us? Why are you leaving us? And it was a sense of God's call, not just to leave them, but to go to take care of that school at Bookcliff, and that's been a good ministry too. Every pastor, every missionary, every minister experiences a time like this of leaving. Sometimes it's good circumstances, sometimes it's bad. And Kent shared with me just a little bit of your circumstances here, and I know you've had a separation that wasn't altogether pleasant, if that's a good way to put it. So I wanted to share with you about this farewell that Paul had with the Ephesians, his experience of farewell with them. He'd had a wonderful ministry, as I said. Almost 3 years, or 3 years he was there. He had some just marvelous experiences of sharing the good news with them and of people responding. There's a number of incidents that are told in the stories about in Acts in chapter 19 about meeting some of John the Baptist's disciples there, about the sons of Sceva and so on, and some of those things that you can go back and read for yourself. And one of the things that really got a hold of me was when it talked about in chapter 19 about burning the books. Ephesus was a center for a lot of magical traditional religion kinds of practices in that section of the world. Ephesus had a number of major temples, one of them to Diana or Artemis of the Ephesians, and it was a big business, but besides being a center of worship, there were other traditional